The Antarctic shoreline was the first to change. Ice sheets larger than entire cities had begun cleaving themselves off the glacier since the 1970s, but the melting increased as the decades wore on. It was as if the shoreline was being reborn, rocky outcroppings peeking out from underneath ice that had covered it for millennia. In late 2018, an ice sheet 5 times the size of Manhattan broke off of Antarctica's Pine Island Glacier. News of its breakage was minor, and its massive shape slipped silently into the water, while sounding a resounding warning about global warming. By the time the damage had been done, sea levels rising and ocean temperatures increasing, news of the ice sheet seemed to reach too late to be impactful. This ice sheet was singled by many as the last evidence needed to prove that climate change was real and that we were in the dreaded depths of the Anthropocene. After the sheet broke off, predictably sea levels rose globally. It added to oceanic warming and helped move other sheets on the glacier. Eventually, ice sheets were breaking off the Antarctic glaciers daily, clogging up the bays like ice chunks being broken and jammed down the Assiniboine River in Winnipeg at the end of a long winter, cracking and breaking. At the first sign of rock appearing through the ice, the powerful men who made these kinds of decisions knew that it was time to put their long-awaited plans into action. 11 people had been born at that point on Antarctic ice. One was born in the 70s, an accidental occurrence during a science expedition. But all of the rest were sent there to be born, to stake a future land claim through birthright. In the summer of 2030, with the world on fire with climate change, post-Trump wreckage, and the crushing sects of both conservatism and the Anthropocene, these babies, now grown, were called home. Most of them had never set foot on Antarctica's shores, being born in boats just safely inside its water, close enough to count as an Antarctic birth. Others were so young, their parents would have carried them more recently in folded arms and tight hugs away from Antarctica, their tiny feet never touching on the tundra. By 2030, the rocks were mostly bare, with dirty snow peaks on their tips, like on sidewalks at the end of a long city winter. There was plant life sprouting up all over the continent. Arctic moss, sea buckthorn, heather. Insects arrived on the continent for the first time in millennia, aside from the bird fleas that lived on the birds that nested there during Antarctica's coldest moments. The botanists said it was time. The entomologists said it was time. The plan had to begin. Even more pressing, small-scale Antarctic tourism had begun, with boatloads of drunk adventure tourists coming to the waters around Antarctica during its summer months. None of these tour ships were allowed to land, but it was only a matter of time before the adventure tour corporations began pushing for this too. And so the powerful men who make these kinds of decisions deployed their Antarctic citizens. New Zealand was the first to send its people. They set up their camp on the far east side of the continent in their neat little piece of Antarctica's pie. Canada was next, sending me. The others followed in the coming weeks and months. Of all the countries, Canada was perhaps the least prepared for our efforts. Sure, we had the Arctic, and I had spent months training in the north to prepare myself for life in the far south. But we couldn't survey the Antarctic land often, and we had less intel on what was happening on the continent at any given time. In short, we were just too far away. As such, I left Canada with much mystery surrounding my trip. What would I find when I got down there? How much had the other countries set up? I would be very alone. I was on a solo trip, while other countries had 2 or 3 people working together to set up their colony. I was forced to attend classes on how to colonize. I was forced to do drills, practicing in the armory, racing back and forth across the rubber floor. I became what they wanted me to be, a change maker, a terraformer, a colonizer. When I got on the ship that was to take me to my new home, I was full of anxiety. Not because of the journey, but because I knew in my deepest heart that I could not carry out their goals. You see, they hadn't really kept tabs on me when I came to Canada to be raised by my family. They knew I was there and ready to be deployed when they needed me, and so perhaps they didn't keep me on enough of a leash. I had become politicized through organizing to support the life of Mumia Abu-Jamal in the late 90s in Toronto. I'd joined Friends of Move, and I had organized protests in front of the U.S. consulate. I'd begun prison abolition groups, political film festivals. I had campaigned. I had organized. By the time I was deployed to Antarctica, I had been an activist for too long to ever consider their goals as my goals. I wouldn't be their colonizer, but I still had to go through the motions. So, sitting on that boat, I was scared. Not because of the mission. I was scared because I was headed to Antarctica to start a revolution. Alone.